Welcome back, bienvenue and all that jazz. It's time to talk about some books. Or in particular today I will be discussing The Wheel of Time. This is going to be a spoiler-free, kind of like should you read / retrospective / attempting to come to terms with my answer of whether or not I felt like this journey was worth it. So for starters, let's just chat. If you somehow don't know, The Wheel of Time is a 14-book series with one prequel novel written by Rodger, at least for books 1 through 11 and the prequel. Then, unfortunately, he passed away, and Brandon Sanderson stepped in and posthumously finished the final 3 books of the main series. And it is epic fantasy, I would say, very focused on kind of people being dumb even in the face of apocalypse. I don't know, like it's kind of a very classic fantasy tale of good v evil, but good is kind of hindered by the fact that people are people, and so good is trying to unite all these nations, and you have a lot of ego and politicking and just mess of people not necessarily working together for the greater good. And so if that is something that you think is interesting to explore, I think that The Wheel of Time is a good enough version of that. Also, if you just want a sprawlingly long, self-indulgent series and you just like cool magic, I wouldn't say it's like the most fascinating magic system I've ever read, but cool magic and decent characters, then I think Wheel of Time is good enough for that. So it kind of exists in this kind of weird nebulous space of, I don't think it is perfect for a character-driven reader, but I also don't think it's perfect for a plot-driven reader. It kind of lives in this weird middle space and can't totally decide like which end of the spectrum it's trying to go for. It kind of, at different books, at different parts of the series, feels more one way or the other. It's not really a consistent overall vibe, I would say. So with that being said, let's kind of jump into my personal feelings, thoughts, experience. So I started reading The Wheel of Time back in 2020, I want to say. So it's been a 3-year journey to complete the series. And it's definitely had its ups and downs. Like, I was really into the first 4 books. The 5th book was good, but not amazing. And then from books like 6 through 10, it was kind of just a steady decline downhill. And then book 11 kind of started to get us going back in the right direction. Then 12 was great. 13 was not as great. And then 14 was just an okay ending. So yeah, I don't know. It was just a interesting time. I think that I really appreciated some of the cool magic stuff that they were doing with the weaving of the pattern and like all of that kind of stuff. However, I also feel like that was somewhat limiting with having this cyclical nature kind of baked into the story. Just like it wasn't everything that I personally wanted. So if we're talking magic and world building, I think those are the strongest parts of The Wheel of Time for me personally. I thought it was a cool world. I liked the idea of these like minions of the Dark Lord being our main antagonistic forces throughout the series. I enjoyed seeing some of the people be crappy. So like it was really the magic and the world building that I enjoyed. Then if we talk characters, I liked some and disliked some. I don't think I was like head over heels in love with any characters. If you forced me to choose a favorite character, I'd say it's probably Moraine. But even then, I'm like, well, there's ups and downs. So like the characters are not the strongest part, in my opinion. I feel like they don't have nice arcs. What they do have is there is character progression. I won't say that they're the beginning at the end as they were at the start of the series. However, I feel like the progression that we got was kind of in fits and starts, and like maybe that's realistic, but from a storytelling perspective, it's not the most compelling like arc for you to go on as a journey with a character for me. So I felt like we were going in like a correct direction with the character, and all of a sudden they would do something really dumb or something like they would have done back in book 1, and you're just like, do you never learn? So I found them to be particularly frustrating. I did like where a lot of them ended up, but the process to get there was definitely not the most enjoyable for me personally. And I don't know that I've ever heard anybody say that they think that the character work is the strongest part of The Wheel of Time. I don't think. If you're somebody who thinks that the character work is the strongest part of the Wheel of Time, please let me know. And then if we're talking plot, I think it is more of a cliche plot, probably. It's very that traditional, classic, good versus evil. You know who you're supposed to root for. You know who the bad people are. There's really not like shocking twists or reveals or anything like that per se. There are epic things that happen. But yeah, I don't know. So those are kind of like my thoughts on those three components of the Wheel of Time. But ultimately, I would say that it was a good but not great, and definitely did not love the journey that I went on with the series. I feel like it was too long in the tooth. I feel like we could have cut probably 3 or 4 books from the series, made this like a 9 or 10 book series max, and you could have had a tighter narrative through it that would have maybe gripped me more. And infamously, there is this chunk of books 7 or 8 through 10 that are called The Slog, and my goodness. So if you are somebody who likes payoff of small plot arcs within a book that then feed into a larger plot arc for the entire series, this is not the series that is going to do that. You're going to have plot arcs that are started in books 1 or 2 and don't come back to fruition until books 13 or 14. And so if you're somebody who loves that, who thinks that that's like so rich and like, ooh, look, they're harkening back, then I think it would really work for you. But if you're somebody like me where you kind of want things to feel more complete, I don't know that this series is going to be the one for you. So with that being said, let's kind of jump into who would I recommend Wheel of Time for. So I think if you are trying to get into big, sprawling, epic fantasy series, this isn't the worst one to try out. I think it is accessible. It's not overly complex in its world building or its kind of political scheming. It is all very kind of digestible, accessible. So I think that that is where Wheel of Time hooks a lot of people, is it tends to be one of the first series that they either read when they were younger and have nostalgia for, or it's like a gateway series to get them back into reading. So if that is you, and you want to get back into maybe epic fantasy, or you want to try something more epic in scope that is still categorized as adult, then I would say that the Wheel of Time is a decent enough place to kind of dip a toe in there, because I feel like that's the demographic that Wheel of Time really resonates with and sticks with, is just if it's kind of your gateway drug, if you will. And so if you're somebody in that camp, I say go for it. If you're somebody in my camp, I was kind of the opinion where like I was curious about it. The show was coming out. I am not newer to fantasy. I've been reading sprawling epic fantasy series, 30 plus book series since like elementary school, junior high. Like that's just been my bread and butter growing up, the kind of sword and sorcery quest fantasy that just has tons of books. And so for me, I don't think that it did like the questing stuff as good as I would have liked it to. It did the epic stuff pretty good, but like, I don't know, there was just not a consistent arc for it. But what kept me going is I just like to be able to have conversations about big series. And so if you talk big fantasy series, you're probably thinking Wheel of Time, you're probably thinking Realm of the Elderlings, you're probably thinking Malazan, Book of the Fallen. Like those are some of the like cornerstone, massive, more modern classics of the fantasy genre. And so I just like to read things that have inspired other works, and I like to be able to have opinions and discussions on popular things. And so that was really kind of the driving force for me finishing the series. So now those are the kind of who I would recommend it for, maybe, and then who I would not recommend it for is if you are super character driven, or you don't like having kind of the gender binary baked into the very fabric of the world building, then I would say Wheel of Time is probably going to piss you off, because like it is definitely very much locked into the 90s idea of the gender binary, so it's not the most progressive thing you'll ever read. There are arguably poor representation of trans characters, like it's a little, and then there's kind of this one relationship that people insist it's so clear that it was a sapphic romance, and it just, at the time he couldn't do it, which is bullshit. Let's be totally honest. If we go and look at books that were published in the 80s or 90s, there are books that were putting that forward. It may not have been as mainstream, but if that was really something he wanted to put in there, he could have. So that argument, I don't want to hear that argument because I don't agree at all, but it is kind of there-ish if you kind of squint and look at it sideways. Maybe. but it's not like as overt as people will make it sound to you. So just, I feel like at this point, you kind of know what the Wheel of Time is. I would say if you hate Lord of the Rings, then it does start very Lord of the Rings narrative. It does expand from there, but it's still at its core is kind of a similar, very good versus very evil quest, kind of bringing our group together and moving the pieces of the world to fight big bad thing. So they are very similar in scope and very similar in kind of ultimate theming, I would say. So if you hate Lord of the Rings, maybe not. But then again, Lord of the Rings does have more descriptions of atmosphere and like setting, whereas Wheel of Time has more descriptions of clothing and people. So I don't know. It's kind of a toss up. But that being said, if you love Lord of the Rings, I think maybe you might like Wheel of Time. However, that being said, I would say if you are somebody who's on the fence about Wheel of Time, go ahead, give book 1 a try. If it feels too Lord of the Ringsy for you, or you like it but don't love it, I would say try book 2, and book 2 is the perfect place for you to decide if you love it or not. I feel like book 2 is really where you see what the Wheel of Time can do. You get to see some of the level of the epic fights that we're going to have. You get to be introduced to the main antagonistic forces in this world. And I feel like it is a good representation of the best that Wheel of Time has to offer. So if you're curious, I would say try the first 2 books. If you're not curious, then I would say avoid the series. And I know that this has been super rambly, but I have had such a hard time kind of processing Wheel of Time because it's been such a long journey. And it has just had such high highs in the earlier books and then such low lows. And then it kind of went out with a fizzle and not a bang for me personally. The way that it ended was such a kind of open-ended ending. And I'm somebody who prefers having the denouement. There you get to see the characters go home or move on, or you get to see the kind of grief of characters die. I like to see that kind of resolution and really kind of sit with it for a while and see what happens for it to feel like the journey was worth it. And I will say that Wheel of Time does not do that. It ends, and then you get an epilogue of kind of ish that action, but that's it. And it doesn't give you any clear answers, nothing. So I will say that if you want like a concrete ending that gives you all of the feels and like the catharsis, I don't know that Wheel of Time is going to deliver that for you. So just be warned. And so I promised that I would be trying to process if I think Wheel of Time was worth it, or if it is worth it for you to pick up as a reader in 2023. And I don't know. I'm going to be totally honest. Like, I'm not mad that I've read The Wheel of Time now, but I also don't know that if I could go back and do it again, would I still read this series now knowing where it ends up? I don't know. I'm kind of leaning towards I maybe wouldn't, but I'm also not like mad that I read it, which I know is kind of like a wishy-washy answer. But I think that if you like this classic fantasy, that there are better versions of what Wheel of Time does that are arguably less problematic in certain ways. But I also think that it is such a cornerstone of the fantasy genre that if you just want to experience kind of what helped pave the way for the series that we have now, it's worth reading in that respect. So take that for what you will. I am not mad that I read it, so I don't regret reading it, but I also don't know if you put me in the time machine would I reread it, not at this moment in time. But that being said, it was also starting to get oddly cozy towards the end, because you just are so familiar with the world and the characters, but that's just a thing of having a big sprawling series, and I think that there are big sprawling series that I like more. So I think that's kind of where I'm settling. With Wheel of Time, I hope that this helps someone out there, or if you just want to chat with me about your love or hatred of the Wheel of Time in the comments down below, I would love to hear from you, but please keep it respectful as always. If you just want to leave an emoji, let's leave a dragon for the Dragon Reborn, shall we? But I think that is all I have to say about the Wheel of Time. It was certainly a journey that I have done, but with that, I will end it. So please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already for more bookish shenanigans like this from moi. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!